then do you share my frustration that much of the sector feels as well, that 3 years, which then butts up any decision close to an election. Now, when we've had social care reforms be kiboshed in the past, it has been during election campaigns. Surely the way to solve this would be to get this done and dusted during this parliament, not kick it into the long grass so that it can then be kiboshed at the next.
No one has shaken Keir Starmer quite like this. In a single electrifying exchange, one unflinching MP dismantled the carefully crafted image he's spent years constructing. On live television, she cut through the polish and exposed the political machinery behind his rise, the tactics, the compromises, and the betrayals that brought him to power. This wasn't a debate, it was a political reckoning. Her critique wasn't just sharp, it was devastating. She laid bare how Starmer turned his back on the very citizens he promised to champion. In that moment, the Labour leader faltered, visibly shaken, at a loss for words, stripped of the calm composure he hides behind. So, what exactly did she say that left Britain's opposition leader humiliated before the nation? In this report, we uncover the full story behind that explosive confrontation and why it may mark a turning point in the battle for political credibility in Britain.
Thank you, Prime Minister. So, following on from the question from Ms. Owen in particular, thinking about those with disabilities, we had a round table, the Health and Social Care Committee, in this very room, and almost where I'm sat was a woman who described her experience of NHS and care. And the way she paraphrased it was, the NHS keeps me alive, but social care is what helps me to thrive. So, Prime Minister, how do you see the role of social care?
Layla.
Liberal Democrat MP and chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, Layla Moran, confronted Keir Starmer head-on. She didn't arrive armed with slogans or party lines, she came with a story. The story of a woman who exposed a painful reality. Social care isn't a privilege, it's a necessity. It's the system that allows millions to live with dignity, to survive day to day. And how did Starmer respond? Not with urgency, not with leadership, but with the same hollow routine the public has come to expect: polished rhetoric, vague assurances, and performative empathy. Once again, no plan, no action, and no sense of the human cost behind the crisis he claims to understand.
Hugely. In its own right, and working alongside the NHS. And I think, like most people, I've long thought we ought to.
That familiar phrase, asterisk, I've long thought about this. Asterisk has become Keir Starmer's shield. It's his way of appearing thoughtful while sidestepping responsibility. But reflection without action isn't leadership. It's avoidance dressed as empathy. For 10 months, Starmer has occupied number 10, and only now does he claim to be Times considering Times reform. That's not urgency, that's delay. Perhaps he's stalling just long enough to repackage the same hollow promises for the next election cycle. This isn't the decisiveness Britain was promised. It's the same political playbook used by leaders who dodge accountability, stall, distract and deflect. And right now, Keir Starmer is playing it word for word.
Reform it, which is why we've asked Louise Casey to carry out that reform programme and to do it on a cross-party basis. She starts her work this month. I have expressly asked her to try to reach out straight away on a cross-party basis, because we need to reform social care. We need to make sure that if we do reform it, it's live.
And there it is again, the familiar Starmer strategy. When the pressure mounts, he doesn't act, he delegates. Responsibility gets outsourced, the burden shifted to yet another review, buying him 2 or 3 years of political breathing room. By then, he hopes, the outrage will have faded. And who does he turn to this time? Louise Casey, a name that surfaces whenever Westminster needs to absorb a scandal. She's built a reputation for publishing reports, not driving reform. Her appointment signals delay, not determination. Starmer calls it progress. Her work begins this month, he says, as if that's something to celebrate. But for those who have waited years for help, that timeline isn't progress, it's an insult. Because while lives unravel, the government's grand plan is to start looking into it now. Asterisk, That's not leadership. It's bureaucracy dressed up as empathy, and it's an affront to every Briton who needed real change yesterday.
Reform, I don't think that that's possible unless it's a cross-party consensus about how we go forward to social care. It is hugely important, as I say, in its own right, and to complement what we do with the NHS. Very hard to get the NHS back working as we want if we don't also sort out social.
Let's be clear about what Keir Starmer is really saying here. In essence, he's admitting that he won't take political risks, that he'd rather posture as a neutral observer than make a decisive stand. It's the illusion of leadership without the substance. Hiding behind the language of consensus isn't diplomacy, it's avoidance. This is classic technocratic cowardice. He's not a moderator at a parish meeting, he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Leadership means direction, not deflection. Lead or step aside. To his credit, Starmer did concede one truth. The NHS cannot be fixed without first fixing social care. He's right, but that's not new. He's said it before, as has every government for the past 2 decades. They all recognise the urgency, then proceed to smother it in committees, consultations and paperwork. It's political gaslighting on a national scale. They acknowledge the house is on fire and then schedule the inspection for 2028. And that's precisely when Layla Moran cut through the noise with a devastatingly simple question, one that exposed just how hollow his words truly are.
Enabler to the economy. And my sister's a care worker, by the way, so I know this firsthand. I mean, absolutely. It's about ensuring that people can live to their full potential for as long as possible in their life.
This was a calculated setup, a pressure question with no easy escape. There were only 2 options on the table. Either Keir Starmer admitted the uncomfortable truth that the Treasury views social care as an endless drain on public funds, or he finally took a firm, courageous position. But instead of doing either, he tried to dance between both, dodging clarity as if it were toxic. And that question wasn't just political theatre. It was emotional dynamite loaded with the weight of real lives, families stretched to breaking point, carers running on fumes, and a system collapsing under neglect. It cut straight through the rhetoric, exposing how detached government thinking has become a sterile policy bubble, utterly disconnected from the human cost it's meant to address. So how did Starmer respond to that moment of truth? He didn't, not with honesty, not with conviction, just another round of evasive platitudes. Once again proving that he doesn't feel the heat, because he's never stood close enough to the fire.
Well, I'm pleased to hear you say that, but then do you share my frustration that much of the sector feels as well, that 3 years, which then butts up...
Firstly, I understand your frustration that this has been pushed down the road too many times. The way I see it is this. One, we need to take time to get it right, and it needs to be cross-party. And Louise Casey is, in my view, the right person on a project like this. I've got huge experience working with Louise Casey. But that shouldn't stop us doing things straight away, to answer your question, which is why we made available £3.7 billion of additional funding for social care authorities in 25-26. That is really important as a sort of first step, and obviously took steps in relation to carers allowance, weekly earnings limit, a fair pay agreement for for adult social care, hugely important. All the analysis shows that we haven't got a sufficient workforce. It's a fragmented workforce, and that most people leaving social care are leaving social care to go to the NHS because they can get onto an integrated framework for progression, which they don't have. So I think all of those things can be done before we even get to the bigger question. So I don't think we should rush the work that Louise Casey is doing. I think that's the right timetable, but I accept your challenge that what we can't do is to sit back until she gets to that part of her report and do nothing in the interim. And I think that the money we've put in, the fair pay agreements and other measures are really important. I should also say that it's among the reasons I commissioned Louise to report in 2 stages, one in 2026 and then later in 2028. And we can get the 2026 recommendations and start acting on them before we get to 2028. So I don't agree with you totally that we should just go sort of both feet in with all the reform right now. We need time on that, but I do accept the thrust of your challenge, which is we do need to do things now, and that's why we're doing what we are doing.
And there it was again, Starmer's trademark move, when pressed on real policy substance, the personal anecdote. Whenever the data fails him and the solutions sound paper-thin, he retreats into emotion, invoking his sister's job as proof of connection and empathy. But let's be absolutely clear, mentioning a relative in social care doesn't raise wages, fix staffing shortages, or build a single new care home. It doesn't shorten waiting lists or ease the crushing pressure on families left to fend for themselves. This is politics by distraction, the classic sleight of hand. Personalize the response, humanize the image, and hope the audience forgets the absence of real policy. But the public isn't fooled. Sentiment without substance is not leadership, it's evasion dressed as empathy.